Hi everyone. So you've now got a little bit of an idea about assessment. Now there's one thing that's very important that you must do before every assessment that your learners are going to do, and that's going to be a pre-assessment briefing. So I'd like to then just give you a pre-assessment briefing so that you can understand why it's important and what you need to cover during your pre-assessment. Now, the pre-assessment briefing, when I give it, I usually give it to an entire group of learners at the same time. Here and there are things that your learners are going to want to speak to you in confidence about, so they can just take notes on that on the various documents that we're going to use. So, if you're doing one of my courses, you'll find the document that I'm speaking about in the section called Pre-Assessment Briefing and Assessment Plan. Now, when I'm doing an assessment, I'm usually doing assessments against specific outcomes and assessment criteria and those related things. And this means that in order for my assessment to have been done completely, the learners need to be competent against each and every criteria. Now, it's not possible for learners to be competent against each and every criteria if they don't know what they're going to be assessed about. So this pre-assessment briefing then is what I do to explain to the learner how it's going to work, what they need to do, and what's going to be involved in it. So the first thing that I usually like to do is I'd like to explain to my learners just what is an assessment. Now, an assessment is a process for collecting evidence about the learner's performance against a given set of standards for developmental or recognition purposes. So in other words, I'm going to assess somebody against a standard to see if they can do it or if they need more assistance and training before doing the assessment again. Now, this is then very important because in South Africa, we've got the NQF system. Now, this NQF system allows for people to get nationally recognized credits and qualifications through a variety of given channels, including small private training providers to the big university systems. So this then all depends on the assessments that are carried out. So when we're talking about a course being accredited or credit bearing or anything like that, it means that you as a learner will end up receiving credits on the National Learner Records database. So your ID then will be connected to the course ID on that register so that people can then realize that you have that qualification. And that's, of course, how the various qualification verification services also verify your qualification. Okay, so that's then generally what assessment is. So, and then the purpose of this pre-assessment briefing is to get people ready to go through that assessment. So, first thing then that I'd like to talk about is I'd like to talk about assessment as a process. So the assessment process has got 4 steps. First, the assessor is going to be doing their planning and their preparation. That means they're going to make all of the arrangements to make the assessment possible. One of the things that they do during that step in the process is by giving the learners the pre-assessment briefing, i.e. explaining to the learners what they're going to be assessed on, how they're going to be assessed on, and when they're going to be assessed on it. So the document on which all of these details are then captured is then usually called the assessment plan. That contains all of the details about the when, the where of the assessment, and then the pre-assessment briefing, which explains all of the other related things. Then after this pre-assessment briefing has been completed and the learner has had the opportunity to prepare, then the learner is we're going to move into the conducting of the assessment. That's going to be when the learner is performing for the assessor, and the assessor is then observing, questioning, and evaluating any products that have been created during the assessment itself. After this conduct portion is finished, then there's going to be a feedback session. In this feedback session, the assessor is going to talk to the learner about their performance during the assessment, and it's going to cover the strong and the weak points of the learner during this assessment. And the assessor is then also going to be getting the inputs from the assessor about how they did. After this process has been completed, the learner is then finished with the process, and the assessor then has to do the review. In the review, the assessor is going to be evaluating their own performance as well as the documents they used, and then to prepare to improve for the next series of assessments that they're going to carry out. So in short, that's the assessment process. Planning and preparation, conducting, feedback, and review. Okay, so after then, while the learner has got an idea of how the entire assessment process is going to work, I tend to explain to the learner the specific purpose of the assessment. Okay, why you are assessing the learner. During that explanation, I also explain to the learner exactly what they're going to be assessed on. So then I take them through the criteria documents, okay, the unit standards or the qualifications, or I take them through the documents, the observation sheet, the questionnaire, and the product evaluation that I'll be using to evaluate their performance. Then after I've given now the learner the idea of what they're going to be assessed on, you know, the details of that, then I talk to them about the assessment plan. Now, the assessment plan is where we make the arrangements of it's going to be at this venue, at this time, this is what you're going to need to bring, this is who's going to hear about the results, all of those elements that are specific and unique to each assessment. And that then gets captured on the assessment plan. Then after that, I explain to my learner just to make sure that they've got the sequence of the activities. So usually then it would be the questionnaire or the workbook first, then it's the practical, then it's the product evaluations. So just so that they know what happens first, what happens next, and what happens thereafter. Okay, after that, I talk to my learners about RPL, or recognition of prior learning. I explain to them what RPL is. That is to say, a process that we can go through to gain them credits for learning they've done outside of a formal classroom environment. So this is then work experience and related matters. So then I explain to them what RPL is, and I also explain to them what evidence could be important to the particular assessment that we are carrying out. Then after we've had that discussion, I talk to my learners about special needs and barriers. Now, special needs are physical or physiological elements that can have an impact on the learner's ability to perform the assessment. And barriers and special needs are, barriers are environmental factors that could play a role in the assessment. So, for example, if the learner is ill or needs to go to the hospital or something like that, that's a special need. Whereas if the assessment venue is dark, noisy, or cold or hot and things like that, those would then be barriers. So if my learners have RPL that they'd like to discuss with me or special needs, I have them indicate that on the form, because the learners might not always be willing to discuss that in front of all of the other students in the class as well. So then I have them record that on the form, and then later on I have individual discussions with them about those elements. Then the next important thing for the learners to know is the roles, responsibilities, and the expectations of all of the parties involved. So the who is the assessor, the learner, any other people that might be involved. Sometimes the assessment involves panel assessments, and you can imagine it would be quite surprising to the learner if they were expecting to see one person and suddenly there's 5 people sitting there observing them, and that can cause a lot of stress. They also need to know who is responsible for making sure what needs to be where and why it needs to be there. So you don't want to show up for the practical assessment and then the learners haven't brought their own tools, and then nobody else has made any arrangement for the tools, and then the assessments can't take place. That would be very bad. So it's always important to talk about the roles, responsibilities, and expectations. Now, after that, I always just like to tell my learners about the principles of assessment, because the principles of assessment are the things that are going to play a role in how I carry out this assessment. So the principles then are the rules that the assessors must follow. They're divided into 3 categories. The categories relating to the evidence that the assessor must collect, that is to say the validity, the authenticity, the currency, and the sufficiency. Then the next category are the principles relating to the methods, okay, how the assessor is carrying out the assessment. That means the assessment methods used by the assessor must be fair, appropriate, integrated, and manageable. Then the last 3 principles that's important for the learner to understand is the principles relating to the overall process. So the assessments carried out must be consistent and reliable. They must be done in an open fashion, and they must be done systematically using the policies and the procedures. So after the learner then has told me that they understand these principles, I will then explain to them the appeals process. So in the event of the learner not accepting the finding of the assessor, they then have the right to appeal. First, they'll have to come to you as the assessor to tell you why they want to appeal against your finding of not yet competent. Then you and they are going to have a discussion. If they accept your finding, then the process ends there. But if they don't accept your finding, then they have the opportunity to go to the moderator. Now, the moderator is the person inside the organization who's responsible for the quality assurance of the assessments being carried out. So that then is what happens inside in the organization. Now, if the learner is still feeling that the moderator didn't listen to them, didn't deal with their situation appropriately, the learner can take it to the awards body or the accrediting ETQA. That's the body that gives the company its accreditation. So, and then after you're finished with those explanations, then it's just important to get your learner's input on how they experienced the pre-assessment briefing, and they should write that down for you, as well as any inputs they've got regarding special needs, barriers, or recognition of prior learning. And then afterwards, you just have them go through the declaration and have them sign it, and then you'll sign it as well. That then is the evidence that you as the assessor have complied with the pre-assessment briefing and that your learners are ready to be assessed.